Thank you, JJ. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Attorney Roy and Attorney Ollie. Thank you so much for inviting me to present today. As many of you would know, universal ICT access is my passion and my personal advocacy. When I first started as an independent researcher back in 2005, it has always been the key driver of not only what I do for a living, but also what I do as a person. So with that, I would like to share my screen. Okay.
Right, looks good.
Okay. So the topic for today is, of course, how to achieve expanded internet access and how to improve the quality of service, and ideally also how to achieve affordable broadband internet. So internet, of course, during the pandemic, we found to be the essential tool that allowed everyone not only to respond to COVID-19 challenges, but also the one thing that still helped us in continuing our daily activities, whether it's working from home or learning from home or conducting business, commerce, and also e-health as well. It is the foundation for digital infrastructure and economy, as well as what will drive us towards digital transformation. Because without connectivity, then all of our internet services and apps, I'm sorry, online services and apps will have no value. Um, there are a lot of challenges 25 years after the internet first came into the Philippines. We have seen um, very good improvements, but then since we are a growing population and we are an archipelago, there remain a lot of issues that need to be addressed, specifically access to internet services. About 40%, if not more, of Filipinos are still not connected to the internet. 52% of all public schools nationwide do not have access to internet facilities according to the Department of Education. And 57% of the 23 million Filipino households also do not use the internet. Now, we do hear a lot of different data coming from different sources. But it is important, I think, to look at the methodology by which the data were arrived at. So we are basing our analysis on the different sources of data and looking at whether or not these data can be considered as credible and whether they reflect the experience of people on the ground. Next, the main contention that I'd like to put forward is that new entrants and competition in the broadband sector are hindered by outdated policies and regulations. This was mentioned by Attorney JJ earlier, but I will expound on this later on. So with that as the problem, the key solution would be to put in place policy reforms. We need to create an environment where we are not focused on a particular segment of industry players. We need policy that will embrace different types of technology and ensure that innovation in terms of technological advancements as well as new business models that are emerging will be welcomed into the country in order to help expand digital infrastructure and help as many Filipino people as possible to access the internet. This, of course, has been discussed to no end, but it would help to remind ourselves how the internet is really valuable to our everyday lives. When you increase broadband penetration by 10%, studies as early as 2009 have shown that it would lead to improvement or an increase in the GDP of a country, of a developing country in particular. A country that was specific to the Philippines, done in 2012, found that mobile broadband adoption increased the Philippines' GDP by 0.61%. Now, this study focused on the early 2000s. So I can imagine that after the emergence of cheaper smartphones in the Philippines, I can imagine that this rate of acceleration would be much higher today. At the household level, it was also found by a study by Ericsson in 2013 that if you introduce entry-level broadband at half of an Mbps, it is enough to increase annual household income by $800. One other thing that became very apparent during the pandemic is that we need government to be online. The president, as early as his first SONA in 2016, already made mention of this, that he doesn't want to see people lining up under the heat of the sun or under the rain. He mentioned that he wanted the government to use the computer, but we think that it's safe to assume that he meant that he wanted the government to be online. So we don't want e-government just because we want everything computerized. We actually can base that decision on studies that have shown how much cost savings we can have if we shift from face-to-face or in-person government transactions going to digital. And as you can see here in the sample countries, there is a huge amount of savings that can be earned by the government for each transaction. Unfortunately, and this was my second point in my summary slide, there's still a lot of work to be done. This is an example of what the digital divide looks like in terms of infrastructure. Um, we note here that the NTC in 2017, and the data that you're seeing here is from 2017, a bit outdated, but this is just to show the disparity in terms of access to infrastructure throughout the country as you go to the different regions. So the maroon and orange colors are areas where either we don't have an internet service provider, or there are internet service providers, but they are not enough to address the demand for internet services. And the percentages you see here come from the latest SWS survey, which asked about adult Filipinos whether they use the internet. And this SWS apparently has been doing this study since 2006. So it's actually very good to look at it because you see a time series of how access to the internet has improved over the years. But consistently throughout the year 2000, after the year 2010 leading up to now, we see that the percentage has not really gone above 50%. So total internet usage of adult Filipinos is about 45%. And NCR would register the highest number. But as you go outside of the metropolitan Manila area, you see that it's less than 50% for Luzon, and for Visayas and Mindanao, it's less than 40%. What you're seeing now is part of the results of the recently concluded National ICT Household Survey that was commissioned by the DICT. It basically shows you that at the barangay level, there is still inadequate digital infrastructure. So those without access to free Wi-Fi is about 88%. Barangays without access to fiber is about 70%, and those without access to cellular towers is around 64%. And as we go to the different regions, especially those that have lower income, such as BARM, the Bicol region, Cagayan Valley, Mimaropa, and Central Visayas, we see that the percentage of barangays that don't have access to these infrastructure is much, much higher. Um, if you could zero in on the access of BARM to fiber optic cable, 99% of the barangays that were interviewed said that they did not have access to fiber optic cable. The main culprit, and we've seen this in a lot of studies done locally and also by foreign observers, as well as multilateral development institutions, is that we are using analog era fixed landline telephone based policy in the age of the internet and smartphones. The picture that you see here is actually very accurate because the laws that we are using right now date back to the 1930s. We are using the radio control law to govern how radio spectrum, or the invisible cable that connects all wireless devices, is governed. So this is actually a rotary dial telephone from the 1930s, and it's actually quite heavy, and you can literally kill someone using this phone, although I don't recommend it. But we are using that law to tell us essentially how to manage spectrum, even if that law was designed for an era where radio broadcast was the main mode of not communication, but transmitting information one way. The next would be the 1936 Public Service Law, or Public Service Act, that gave the mandate to what was then known as the Public Service Commission, basically as the regulator of all industries where the private sector participants are allowed to take the place of the government in terms of offering services. The next would be the 1979 Charter of the National Telecommunications Commission, the industry regulator, which, if you look at the EO 546, was actually just inserted there as a part of the Ministry of Transportation and Communication. Of course, in 1979, I was, I guess, a toddler at the time. The telephone was also the main mode of communication. The youngest of all these laws would be the 1995 Public Telecommunications Policy Act, which of course is the law for telecommunication services. And in that law, um, of course, the landline was still the key technology. In fact, many of the networks there, including the international carrier network and the mobile service network, would require that the operator deploy between 300,000 and 400,000 landlines. So I don't have to explain that the technology we use to communicate, to connect, and to essentially um, access information from around the world would be the computer, digital devices such as the smartphone. So how do we improve the situation that we are in now? Essentially, we need to have policies that reflect the needs and requirements of the digital connectivity age. We would need more and different types of players to essentially develop more infrastructure using different types of technology. And we need our policy to reflect how we now connect to digital devices. The Open Access in Data Transmission Bill, which I will explain in the next few slides, is actually based on a framework that first ensures that new entrants are able to get into the market that exhibits high structural barriers to entry. In some cases, there are actually, a more extreme framework that's being used where there is functional or structural separation of the different players that are operating in a particular network. I will explain that later, but essentially, open access can be different types of models. But the open access bill that's in Congress is just one type. So in an open access approach, you create competition in the different layers of the internet infrastructure or network. So you're able to allow a wide variety of physical networks and applications to interact with each other. There are cases where in open access, you separate the physical infrastructure from the services, or those that offer the physical infrastructure from services, and the wholesalers from the retailers. But essentially, the goal really here is anyone can connect to anyone in a technology neutral environment, and you encourage innovative and low cost delivery of internet services. This is an example of the different options that the market players can adopt in an open access business model. So from the left, the fully integrated model, you have a single vertically integrated operator, meaning from wholesale to retailer, from international connectivity down to the last mile, even down to the devices that we're using. There is a single vertically integrated operator that installs, constructs, maintains, operates and maintains the infrastructure or the network. Um, in a way, the Philippines was at some point using this model. But more and more, we are seeing that, of course, you cannot really stop the developments in technology, and new business models will always emerge. So since we don't live in a bubble, we see that these different improvements and changes are coming into the country, although some of them experience difficulty because of the outdated policy and regulation that we have. So as you go from model number 1 to model number 5, you see that there can be a situation where your network operator and active network providers can be different from your retailers and the different iterations of the model. But essentially, there is the extreme model at the right side would be a fully separated um, network where the physical networks the providers of the physical networks are different from the retailers, and you usually can see this in countries like the UK, Australia is also doing this, New Zealand, and in I think maybe model number 4 or 5 would be also Singapore. So what is the open access in data transmission bill all about? There are 3 key reforms. We can summarize actually the different provisions of the bill using these bullet points. One is the bill wants to promote an environment where you lower barriers to market entry for internet service providers. It carves out internet service, which is a different service from telecommunications, out of the telecom service category, and ensure that for those that want to provide the network and services for internet service, you are allowing a simpler, more efficient way of allowing or licensing these market players. The bill also promotes the fast tracking and lowering the cost of broadband network rollout. And this is done through several provisions, one being the promotion of infrastructure sharing and the streamlining of the different permits and requirements as well. And also, co-deployment, co-location, and cross-sector infrastructure sharing, meaning you use existing and future infrastructure that can be found in other sectors, and essentially broadband networks can be deployed together with those other infrastructure. And finally, the bill also has provisions that would make more spectrum available for internet connectivity by providing transparency and also encouraging a more consultative process in spectrum assignment. So essentially, these are the challenges that the bill intend to address. So high barriers to entry, introduce a simple and efficient registration process, and remove the congressional franchise and CPCN requirement for those providers that intend to offer internet services only. So here you allow more and different types of players to build and operate the network. Just as an example of how outdated our law is, we are probably unique as we are the only country in the world, as far as I know, and I would welcome any, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are the only country in the world that still requires a franchise from Congress to be passed as the first step in licensing, and a certificate of public convenience and necessity, which is awarded through a quasi-judicial process by the regulator as the second step of permitting or licensing. And before you even get to the licensing part of, offering internet services, all other countries in the world, usually the licensing for internet network operators and internet service providers would be awarded either by the Ministry of ICT or by the industry regulator. And if you look at the more developed countries, such as South Korea and Japan, the requirement is just registration or notification to the Ministry of ICT or the regulator. Uh, the problem with having all of these different steps is that it takes a lot of time and costs a lot of money. And so we are essentially, we essentially have a licensing process that is designed for the big players only. We need to change our mindset because internet is not the telephone. Internet connectivity thrives when there is decentralization. It's essentially a distributed system where different nodes are interconnected. In fact, there's actually no room for a monopoly in internet because you essentially need to have different interconnected networks so that the whole infrastructure, the whole ecosystem is resilient. The more redundancy, the better, because then you'll have a robust system. So you don't need to worry that when there is a cable cut or a fiber cut, that all the systems will be down, because the internet will always find a way to get the data and route it somewhere until it reaches its destination. That is how different the internet is to a telephone or telecom network. So we need to ensure that our policy and regulation welcome small players, nimble, flexible players that are capable of installing, constructing, and also offering internet services at the local level, at the provincial level, municipal level, even barangays and communities. So if you have this kind of framework where you need to spend between a year and 5 years to get your license, of course, time costs a lot of money, and you can essentially imagine how restrictive this kind of licensing process is. Also, we need to change our policy and update it because the laws that we're using now are technology specific. It's designed for a particular technology, particularly the analog landline technology. And also, I would contend that you cannot lump all types of networks under telecommunications because there are other networks that can offer internet services. Just as an example, cable systems um, are able to offer internet. The the power transmission grids and even distribution systems and there are cases in other countries that do this, are able to offer internet. TV white space can also be a vehicle for transmitting your data. So many other technologies and types of networks out there can offer internet services. Second, we need to address the problem of costly and tedious network rollout. Of course, our friends from the telecom industry have always complained about this. So but it is not only the telcos that are experiencing this. Many different types of service providers at the local level, even the government itself, say that they experience this. But I am glad to hear that the government, through a joint memorandum circular between the DICT, ARTA, and other government agencies, are already addressing this. And recently, Congress also passed a law that will allow the president to, I guess, basically override all the different permits and regulatory requirements when there's a national emergency. So there are already steps being taken to ensure that this is addressed. Oh, and also, before I forget, of course, the DICT has also issued the Common Tower Policy, which I hope will address the challenges of the mobile network operators in deploying towers throughout the country. And finally, we need to make more spectrum available. Uh, we do know that there is a third telco that was selected, and the third telco was awarded a list of 4G and 5G, potential 5G frequencies. But we also should not ignore that many of the places around the country, especially outside of the urban areas, would benefit greatly from wireless technologies. And we need to make sure that those who are offering services in the periphery, the small players or um, you know, internet service providers who are actually already on the ground and serving the communities that are often ignored by the big players, we need to make sure that they are also given uh, an opportunity to use this valuable resource in order to connect communities to the internet. So there are other key provisions in the bill. One is that it mandates interconnection. Of course, interconnection was a big issue in the telecommunications industry, but it's still an issue in terms of internet connectivity. We need to put in place service performance standards, or at least clarify the mandate of our government agencies as to who is in charge of setting, monitoring, and enforcing service performance standards. And penalties for violators are also proposed in the bill, as well as the right of internet end users. The bill is already filed in both houses of Congress. At the House of Representatives, Congressman Victor Yap, the ICT committee chair, has filed House Bill 57. There are other legislators at the House who have filed a similar bill, but the ICT committee approved a version that is very close to House Bill 57 that was filed by Kong Yap. The ICT committee approved this in November 2019, exactly a year ago, but it's still awaiting a committee report. In the Senate, the bill, Senate Bill 45, was filed by Senator Ralph Recto, and is now co-authored by Senator Grace Poe. The bill was referred to the Science and Technology Committee chaired by Senator Nancy Binay, but there is no movement yet. We are awaiting the Senate to conduct its first hearing on the bill. But the good news is that there is a growing number of organizations that are supporting the bill, or at least have expressed their support publicly for the open access bill ever since the pandemic hit. So as of November 2020, the the Cabinet's Economic Development Cluster, led by the NEDA, the DOF, and the DBM, have expressed their support for the bill. And they believe that it is part and parcel of how we can move forward beyond the pandemic and towards digital transformation. Recently, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas also announced in a press statement that they are supporting open access among other legislative initiatives that will help ensure that that DSP can achieve digital no financial inclusion through digital connectivity. Both the Department of ICT and the National Telecommunications Commission have also expressed their support for the bill in various public hearings and meetings. And all of the other business organizations, think tanks, industry associations, and advocacy groups have also expressed support. Some of them have even written to Congress and to the President to make the Open Access Bill a priority legislative initiative. So with that, I end my presentation. I am, of course, here as lead convener of the Better Broadband Alliance. We are a coalition of different stakeholders pushing for policy reform so that we can achieve better broadband for the country. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to discuss with our panelists and the attendees as well. Thank you.